Well, thank you all for joining us and welcome to LEMD's Alive Educational Series. We're so glad you're here. I'm LEMD's social media manager and tonight's host, Brenda Rios. At LEMD, we go beyond traditional telehealth. We're building a community rooted in education, innovation, and personalized support. The Men's Health Series is a part of our commitment to equipping you with practical tools and evidence-based strategies to take ownership of your health. Tonight, we're excited to welcome back Dr. Robert Hitchcock, an emergency physician with over 25 years of clinical experience and a passion for advancing healthcare through technology and innovation. Dr. Hitchcock oversees a national network of medical and mental health providers, serving hundreds of thousands of patients, and brings a rare combination of frontline expertise and healthcare leadership to everything he does. He received his MD from sunny Stony Brook School of Medicine and completed his residency at Lincoln Medical and Mental Health Center in the Bronx. Dr. Hitchcock, thank you so much for joining us again here tonight. To kick things off, can you share what drew you into medicine and how has your perspective on men's health and longevity evolved across your career?
Great question. I have kind of always been interested in sort of healthcare. I was in college though, and I was a computer science major, and I was getting really bored of sitting in the computer room at 2 o'clock in the morning trying to figure out why my code wasn't working, and I needed an easy class. I took an emergency medical technician class, and I completely fell in love with pre-hospital medicine. Changed my entire career from there. I finished out my computer career, but then I went into pre-med, finished my pre-med, and then went on to medical school. And since then, I've been very active, like you said, with technology and healthcare and the crossroads between those. Um, I would say my perspective on men's health is very personal. So I'm in my mid to late 50s now. I'm in exactly a lot of the things we're going to be talking about here. And what I've realized is that mainstream medicine and healthcare doesn't teach you about longevity, about healing, about how to feel better, how not just to accept some of the changes that happen as you age as being normal. And I know we'll probably go into some of that tonight. Um, and so I've come to realize that there's a lot more to caring for patients than diagnosing disease and treating disease. And so that led me to become board certified in obesity medicine and start to utilize peptides, GLP-1s, and other things in my practice to help people feel better, live better, primarily.
It's amazing. And I'm glad that you mentioned that now you're kind of realizing that there's not a lot of focus on this idea of the preventative side of it, you mentioned that you're in your 50s, and I feel like now I know it's a men's health series, but I'm in my 30s and I'm only just now realizing, okay, like I need to make changes now. So with men, they're kind of notorious for not going to the doctor when they need to go, but there's this idea that feeling tired and slow after 40 is just a sign of getting older. But at which point is that actually a cop out, and what's physiologically driving those changes?
Sure. Men, when they start to hit around their 40s, I'll start with the physiologic changes. And the big changes here are naturally your testosterone levels drop. Testosterone is a big driver for all the things male, right? That's our aggressive hormone. That's what gives us muscles. That's what drives us to be men. And by the way, around this time, the women's hormones are changing too. But so men's testosterone will drop, their growth hormone is dropping. And what's happening is that they're starting to lose about 3 to 8% of their muscle mass every year. And they're trading it and probably putting on visceral fat. And visceral fat is what happens in the abdomen around your organs. It's not the belly fat that you see on the outside or that you start to accumulate around the waist. So you're putting that on, which is extremely pro-inflammatory. This is causing high blood pressure, high cholesterol, insulin resistance. So on top of all this inflammation, you're starting to see sleep fragmentation, and changes in mentation that go along with all of these things. So it is a natural process, and in your 40s, you should notice that it takes a little longer to recover from things. You may need a little more sleep. You may feel a little more tired with things, but it should be a little more. You may find yourself a little forgetful now and then, but it shouldn't be where I've got to put post-it notes whenever I have to remember something and put it on the refrigerator because I just can't remember what's going on. I constantly find myself walking into a room and not remembering why I'm there. It should not interrupt your life. Once
Mm,
it start to get to that point, it really is a cop out. And you need to pay attention to naturally things happen, but you don't have to let it get out of control to the point where it's negatively impacting your life.
hmm And you mentioned muscle loss, which, sometimes it could be sneaky and it doesn't happen all at once. Can you walk us through what's actually happening hormonally that's starting this process and when maybe we start to see signs that it has begun?
Yeah, so you're right. The signs are very tough, and that's because I sort of alluded to this. While we're losing muscle mass, we're gaining visceral fat. So often the scale stays the same or may actually increase slightly. But you're actually losing that really, really important muscle. And this is driven primarily by growth hormone and testosterone. So those are the two really big factors that are driving that. In our younger years, in our 20s, we've got testosterone through the roof. We're in what's called an anabolic phase. We're building and building and building. The 30s are kind of steady state, and the 40s we become catabolic. We actually start digesting our own body to use for energy and things like that because we're not able to keep up with the level of muscle that we need to. Now, lean muscle is an incredible utilizer of energy. As we start to lose that, we will start to see our metabolism slow. So between that and our visceral fat, now we're having changes that are leading us to being more tired, having more inflammation, being less active. And over time, by the time most men recognize their muscle loss, it's become really obvious. And usually it's around times of injury or they just can't do the things they used to do and enjoy doing that requires that. So catching it early is super important. And I'm really thrilled that we have now body composition scanners and things like that that are much more available. Um, and I think it's an important part of men's health is in your 40s and 50s to start getting baseline and tracking those things because you might not see it and you might not feel it until it's too late.
And I'm glad that you mentioned the growth hormone. So you had mentioned that with as men age, the testosterone levels and growth hormone levels decline, and that decline can be pretty significant. So going into the growth hormone section, what does dropping that growth hormone actually mean for men day-to-day performance? And if you could elaborate on the energy, maybe body composition, recovery, and is there a reason why more doctors aren't having conversations around that with some of their patients?
Sure. I think two really good questions. So let's start with the first one, and then I'll try not to be too cynical with the second one. So the first one, so growth hormone and insulin-like growth factor 1. I'm going to kind of lump those two together because they're intimately related in the body. As that falls, like I mentioned, we start to gain visceral fat. High levels of growth hormone can get rid of visceral fat. But so we're now allowing that to grow a little bit more. That's hormonally active and it screws up your insulin, giving you insulin resistance, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, the metabolic syndrome things. We're losing our muscle mass as we talked about. Overall, energy is going down as well. We're starting to see mitochondrial delays and dysfunction. So we've lost our energy. We've got big sleep disruption. So IGF-1 has a lot to do with our sleep patterns. So we're starting not to sleep the same. We may feel like we got 8 hours worth of sleep, but it's not regenerative and curative sleep that you would get. We heal slower. So growth hormones are also really important for how we heal. So we don't respond as well. And on top of that, now we've got that increased inflammation. So we're really hurting ourselves as far as healing goes. We're also seeing IGF-1 can have an impact on short-term memory. So that's where some of the cloudiness and the fuzziness starts to come in later in life. So that growth hormone's really important.
Mm,
Um, and I think you asked about physicians. There are real growth hormone deficiencies out there. Really, these are true diseases, and they're manifest very different than normal loss of growth hormone. I think physicians are able to recognize that, refer, and get those people treated. But honestly, there's not a lot of time, like I said, in medical school spent on how to sort of combat things that are happening naturally in your body. Um, the FDA doesn't recognize some of the things that we're talking about as legitimate, if you will. Um, and so that makes some doctors really scared. I don't want to do something the FDA doesn't do. And I think to not get too cynical about it, um, there's not a lot of money for a pharmaceutical company to make on this stuff, and therefore we're not seeing a lot of research into it. We're not seeing it be mainstream teaching. Um, and frankly, at least 30 years ago when I was in medical school, and from what I know today, they're not spending time on longevity. It is
mm.
something that you have to have an interest in and go into later.
And now, when we're talking about some of those signs that men might experience when their growth hormones are dropping, such as maybe low energy, they're not sleeping well, some common peptides that come up to address that is TESA, IPA. They're often paired together. Can you break down what each one is doing individually and why combining them can help create a stronger effect rather than just one of them?
Sure, absolutely. The tesamorelin and ipamorelin both will ultimately increase growth hormone and IGF-1 levels. They do them slightly differently. Tesamorelin does it directly with the pituitary gland, whereas ipamorelin works. It acts like ghrelin, the hunger hormone, but without creating hunger and weight increase. And that through a feedback loop will tell your body to create more growth hormone. The tesamorelin is, think of it as a very cyclical, very spiky peak and valley medication. And so it works really well for some things. One of the things it does amazingly well and is FDA approved for is to combat that visceral fat. So it works really, really well with the same hormone, growth hormone, by combating visceral fat, primarily because of the cyclical nature of it. The ipamorelin causes a more steady state release of growth hormone, so that it is doing more about kind of um, general approaches to muscle building and improving healing and recovery, things like that. So you're combating two very, very different things, but two things that are incredibly important. By combating visceral fat with tesamorelin, you're able to build muscle faster because you're getting that inflammatory state down. And then ipamorelin is there to provide steady state background. So
Mhm.
I think the combination is important, and putting them together has shown dramatic benefits over tesamorelin alone.
And staying on testosterone just for a little bit longer, because we talked about visceral fat, and it could be a major issue with men. How do these peptides target that deep organ fat, and why is it so much more dangerous than the fat that you normally can see?
Right. And that target is with the tesamorelin in particular, is by having growth hormone spikes and valleys. And so the body is seeing that and saying, this is not normal steady state for me. And it uses that visceral fat, absorbs it, releases it, and then uses it and gets rid of it, uses it for energy instead of allowing it to continue to build up. Like I mentioned, the reason it's dangerous is unlike all the other fat in your body, it's active. It's an endocrine gland itself. So it's having immediate effects on your body, and in particular, it causes insulin resistance. So this is the one that's tied to diabetes, to pre-diabetes. and to huge spikes in inflammatory markers. It'll, and mentioned before, it's also going to end up giving you metabolic syndrome, including hypertension and high cholesterol levels. So that's the real concern with visceral fat. Some visceral fat is protective, but too much visceral fat is very destructive.
Mm. And we have a few questions coming in. If you can help answer these. And one asks, with tesamorelin, how real are the carpal tunnel side effects? Do you have any knowledge on any of that?
So with tesamorelin, we do see some ligamentous. You can get ligament pain. You can get tendon pain from time to time. A lot of that has to do with, are you also working out and are you also taking ipamorelin for muscle growth? There are some case reports of carpal. It's unclear to me if they're really related. I've never seen a big study around that, and I don't personally have any patients that have had carpal tunnel. I think that if you already have carpal tunnel syndrome, that's really it's a physical restriction on the nerve running through the carpal tunnel, and it really does need to be dealt with surgically. There's really no way around that. So I would say I don't think it would necessarily worsen it, just because I'm not seeing any evidence that they're truly linked.
And going back to visceral fat, because we just had a comment that came in, you mentioned that some visceral fat is still healthy. Is there a number or maybe a percentage that's considered healthy visceral fat?
There are, and it depends on multiple factors, including your age, your height, your ethnicity, things like that. But it's roughly around 7-ish to 10%-ish of total body fat being visceral fat. Once you get about above about 23 or so, it starts to become a real issue. So there are numbers that can be assigned to it. It's really hard to measure visceral fat out of getting a true body scan. You can do it sometimes with CT scans and MRIs, but you want to get a good DEXA scan to measure that.
Mm. And going back to tesa-ipa, another peptide that is paired with it can be KPV. Do you have any insights on why KPV could be paired into that protocol? And what does KPV bring to the table that maybe tesa-ipa aren't already covering?
Yeah, so Tessa and IPA are, like we talked about, their growth hormone things. They're there to rebuild. What they're fighting against is they're fighting against inflammation. Inflammation is part of healing, but not all inflammatory mediators are good for you. Many of them are not good. Um, the KPV actually brings to the table the ability to help fight that. So it will heal gut lining and reduce leaky gut syndrome. And it's a direct combat to an inflammatory state. So what it's doing is overall reducing the amount of inflammation. It's like trying to go fast in the car with your foot on the brake. You're going to smoke the tires, and you're really not going to get anywhere. That KPV allows that inflammatory state of your body to be decreased, allowing the test and IPA to work, reduce the visceral fat, reduce the inflammation from visceral fat. So all along, it's an additive effect and something that helps the test and IPA just be more effective.
Mm. And now shifting to recovery, because we had some questions that were talking about ligament pain, and our next peptides will kind of go into that area. So, with BPC 157 and TB 500 being huge in that area, for a man that's still training hard but might be dealing with nagging joints or old injuries, maybe just slower recovery. How are these peptides actually, what are these peptides actually doing at that tissue level?
Perfect. So this is the Wolverine stack, right? And what we're looking at, these are really focused on recovery. Both of them are causing new blood vessels to form called angiogenesis. That will allow nutrients to come into areas to allow for healing. Um, they they're really we'll keep it on a high level. They're there for recovery. The difference between the two is very dramatic, and it's almost the same as the dramatic difference between Tessa and IPA. So the BPC 157 is very good at helping with local responses and local healing. So these are the strains and sprains and overutilization of muscle we get in the gym and the tears and those types of things. So really acute type injury, going to that site, telling the body, fix this, giving it the tools that it needs, fighting against inflammation, telling it to bring blood cells in. Whereas the TB500 is it's a partial string of thymosin beta 4. And what that's doing for you is that is telling cells it's going to basically pick up cells that are going to fix things in your body and taking them to the ultimate place where they need to be. This is a more systemic. This is an overall kind of healing. This can deal with chronic joint inflammation and joint injuries and just generalized body health and healing. So one of them is very focused on the immediate needs, and the other one is taking care of more chronic, more generalized needs.
Mm. And I've heard from some LAMD customers online that they're also pairing it with Motsi because they go to the gym and they're getting all of this energy. And it is a newer peptide for those that might not have heard of it. Can you briefly explain what Motsi is and what it does for metabolism and muscle?
Sure. So MOTS-c is a very different peptide than a lot of the other ones that we're talking about. This is actually has to do with mitochondrial DNA. This is inside the mitochondria. So the mitochondria are the powerhouses of our cells. They're the ones that are responsible for making things that we use for power. And you may have heard this with NAD because NAD is a factor in the production of ATP, the energy cycle inside the mitochondria. So MOTS-c is mitochondrial in nature. It works right at that house, and it does a couple of things. So it allows the cells to use glucose more effectively and without having to have insulin around. So it is saying, bring in sugar. We're going to make this bad boy work. We're giving that powerhouse power. We are also helping that energy store be able to be used much more efficiently and much more effectively. So basically, you're making the energy system in your body work more streamlined, and it is increasing the energy output as well. So this is allowing your body to then have what it needs, the energy behind recovery. Because without having energy, you can put all of the things in place to have cellular recovery and growth, but you need energy to do that. So that's where the MOTS-c comes in really, really nicely. And as I mentioned in the beginning, one of the things that is happening to us naturally as we age is our mitochondria are becoming less efficient, less effective, and we're starting to slow down the delivery of power. So that's where your MOTS-c and even your NAD plus can have a big effect.
And on that physical performance, maybe something that men don't always connect is cognitive and physical performance. They think of them as separately. Going into peptides like Cmax and CLANC that are supporting that mind-body link, why does it matter for overall performance?
Um, So, I mean, they're directly linked. So, anybody who's ever experienced even a little depression, even normal depression from the loss of a loved one or something along those lines, you know that it has directly affected you physically and how you feel, the energy that you have. So, your drive and desire for a lot of things are affected through that mental feedback to your body as well. But one of the things that happens without supporting your mental abilities and mental acuity is it really affects things like sleep cycles as well. And without normal sleep cycles, you start to produce more cortisol. It's a stress hormone in the body, and it makes life miserable. It's that pro-inflammatory, bringing in more inflammation, making you feel absolutely lousy, making you retain water, and I mean, you just feel terrible. So
Hmm.
supporting the brain health is really important because it'll directly link to how willing you are to be active, how into being active you are, and then being sharp just helps you do everything better.
Now, pulling all of this information, because we covered a lot and we covered a lot of peptides as well, for a man who's training constantly, but maybe not recovering the way he used to, with all of these peptides we talked about, what does an optimized stack look like? And how do you build on it without overdoing it?
Great question. So I will say that this is a little bit individualized, but a general approach to an optimized stack. Number one is the Wolverine stack. So BPC 157, TB 500. I think you have to have that. It's directly at helping you to heal. Um, Throwing in the ipamorelin is also going to be very important, and pair it with the Tessa, particularly if you have visceral fat. If you're super lean, you know your visceral fat's low, you can probably go with ipamorelin alone, and then adding in MOTS-C after that. Um, those would be my recommendations for the starting stack for this. I think there's lots of other things out there, and it sort of depends on if you also have other goals with outcomes with being in the gym, right? If you really want to build, there are other things that you want to put in there. But as far as the kind of the basics that every guy should look at, that would be the stack I look at. Now, how do you not overdo it? Number one, you have to have a good foundation. And this is true of everything. If you are not sleeping well with good sleep hygiene, if you are not eating well and staying away from highly processed foods, limiting your alcohol intake, and have the right kind of nutrition, including high protein, 20 to 30 grams of protein each meal, 1 to 1.5 grams per kilogram of body weight. So nutrition, exercise, and sleep. Number one, do those because without it, the others are just not going to have maximal effect at all. If you're doing those, then start slow. Start with one group. All right. So start with your Wolverine stack. Use that, add to it over time so that you can get a feeling for what each one's doing for you. And then make sure to cycle. These are not things that you should be on constantly. If you are, you're overdoing it. There are some guidelines out there about how to cycle through those. Again, everyone has their own opinion, but cycling is important. You do need to come off of these things from time to time, then get back on it. Quality is super important. No one should ever put a research peptide in their body. 100%. You have no idea where it came from. And honestly, most of the certificates of analysis you get were made up. So they're easy to find and they're cheap, and that should really scare the bejesus out of you. So you want to get it from LEMD, or you want to get it from a medically dispensed pharmacy that is controlled, and you know you're getting good quality. And then you're going to want to monitor outcomes. And that's not just physical outcomes. You're going to want to watch body composition, of course, but you're also going to want to early on get a baseline growth IGF-1 level, growth hormone levels, glucose, hemoglobin A1C, testosterone levels, et cetera. And you're going to want to follow those. So you're going to want to make sure that you're not causing massive spikes in some of these as well. That's going to cause more complications than it is benefits. So there's a lot that goes into it. It's being smart about it, and not trying to do everything at once.
Yeah, 100%, especially with those lifestyle and setting the foundations, because those really will set up anyone for success. And it could be as small as making sure you're getting that protein in, cutting out the foods that aren't what you should be on, especially like when you're on peptides like GLP-1. So 100% agree with you, Dr. Robert. So I have one more question for you, but
Yep.
before we get to that one, I'd like to introduce someone special. So we have a new host for our Men's Health series starting next month, and this special person has been in the shadows and he's finally going to be out here in the spotlight. So I want to introduce him and he'll talk a little bit about himself. So Jared, please welcome and let us know a little bit about yourself.
Thank you, Brenda. I feel like I needed a dramatic introduction emerging from the shadows. No, my
We'll have
name's
that for
Jared
the next
Turner.
call.
Yeah, the next call. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. Dr. Hitchcock amazing content there. I need to go on that Wolverine stack ASAP. My kids, if I let my hair's curly and if I let it grow too long, my kids start calling me Wolverine. So I think that fits me personally. Uh, I'm on the board of Ellie. I've been with the company for a little less than a year. I was the CEO of two large direct sales companies in other lives in the health and wellness space, and had some success there, and kind of took some time off to be with my family, to be a stay-at-home dad, so to speak. And I went to the Direct Selling University annual event in Dallas, Texas last April, and I saw Honey give a speech about Ellie. And I remember thinking, in a sea of, direct sales companies, and it's so competitive. I remember thinking her vision and her experience and the platform of this company with telehealth and compounding pharmacies overlaid on a direct sales model, that's revolutionary. She's an impactful and inspiring founder. And I said, this is the company I would love to help. And so I called Honey one day and I said, I'm really focused on my kids right now. We have a ranch here in Salt Lake City, Utah. We've got horses and goats and sheep, and it's kind of my next chapter. But I said, anything I can do to help you, I would love to jump in and do that. So I've been on the board and I'm helping with different projects here and there. And Honey and Brenda asked me to jump in on the men's circle. And so I'm really excited to host this call moving forward and to work with Brenda and people like Dr. Hitchcock. So really looking forward to spending more time with all of you. And if there's any specific content or anything you'd like to hear in future calls, please put it in the comments right now so we can make sure we capture everything you'd like to hear from us here at LEMD. Thanks, everyone.
Oh, thank you so much, Jared. We're going to be super excited to have you for our next call. And on that note, if anyone has any topics for any upcoming discussions that they want to make sure that we cover, you can also email marketing@LEMD. So please be sure to do that and tune in next month for Jared's first call. Thank you, Jared. Robert, going back to you. So finally, for all of the men listening and watching right now, who are ready to make a change, what are the first steps that you would tell them to make? I know you mentioned a lot of changes such as for lifestyle, but what's the first step that you would recommend they take?
Um, if they haven't had a regular visit with their primary care doctor and had routine labs and a regular checkup done, go do that. Make sure that you're healthy enough for what you're about to embark on. Let's start at a baseline. You should also get your testosterone level checked. Doing a lot of these things without getting your testosterone in order is going to be really not work as well. You're going to be fighting yourself the whole way. So, um, optimize that platform we talked about, make a commitment to it, and figure out how that's going to work. It doesn't have to be a big commitment. You can do resistance bands at home. You don't have to join a gym. Eating better is not more expensive or hard if you're not a cook. Look at things like Factor and some other meals like that where you can get more streamlined foods. Once you know sort of that you've got your testosterone under control, it's where it should be, and that you are healthy enough for this, then it's starting to start small and think about where you are. If you are overweight with high visceral fat and metabolic syndrome, start with a GLP-1 and add on some TESA-IPA. Let's fight those things. Let's get that weight down, get the inflammation under control, while you're learning routines to exercise more efficiently and effectively, and then add from there. If you're like Matt, who shared, who doesn't really need to have that weight loss or deal with that visceral fat, then you go right into things that are going to start helping you rebuild and maintain. It also depends what age you are. If you're in your 20s and 30s, you have very different needs than if you're in your 60s and 70s. So it's really about research, commitment to it. This is not short term. This is long-term lifestyle changes that you have, but please make sure that you're healthy enough to do this.
I love it. So much, so many good tips, especially with starting small. And if to our guests who weren't able to write it all down, just listen to the replay. And we're definitely going to have Dr. Hitchcock back again. I know we didn't get through all of our questions and even all of our audience questions. So thank you so much for all of this amazing information, Rob. And thank you to our guest for tuning in. If you were invited to this call by someone, please be sure to reach out to them. Bob, thank you so much again for joining us.
Absolutely my pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.